Welcome to Coffee with a Risk Manager, where we share a cup of coffee with colleagues and discuss all things risk management in higher education. Stacie Kroll, Managing Director of Gallagher's Higher Education Practice. And on today's episode, we have a very special guest, a non-risk manager, if you will, but certainly an invitee to this conversational series. I'm delighted to introduce Angie Beisner, Senior Director at the U.S. Council for Athletes' Health, USCA for short. And USCA is a newly announced partner with Gallagher through our athletic accident practice. So Angie, tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of who USCA is and what you do.
Thanks. Well, I'm excited to join all of you today. My experience is really as a clinician. I have 25 years as a college athletic trainer before moving to USCA 2 years ago. So spent a lot of time in higher ed practicing and working for the health and safety of student athletes. I joined USCA 2 years ago because this is really a company that's devoted to health and safety best practices for athletes across campuses. We work with several different groups, about 20 colleges, 20 conferences, 200 independent colleges, and we work as a third-party, independent, unbiased resource for best practices, education, compliance, risk management for institutions. So excited to talk to a group of risk managers today, kind of share things from my perspective, learn some more from your area, and then hopefully we can all work together to create better and safer campus communities.
I love it. So part of our tradition on the show is to showcase our coffee mug that we drink out of. And as you can imagine, I have a ton that I rifle through. But today, because we're concentrating on athletics, I picked a coffee mug for Western New England University here in Western Massachusetts, a D3 athletic program.
Yep.
And my sister-in-law is the women's ice hockey coach there. So I have plenty of Golden Bears gear around my house in support of her hockey team. So go Golden Bears. What are you drinking out of today?
Well, I'm actually not a coffee drinker.
Okay.
I am a tea drinker. So
There we go.
Anybody who knows Ted Lasso, I've got a little hot brown water instead. And I figured since we're talking about creating coaching cultures, what better than to go with a positive coaching culture. So really excited to have my tea today instead of coffee. Sorry, I'm cheating a little bit.
That's all right. That's all right. We'll allow that to happen. So let's dig into our topic. So as we're preparing for this, you and I kind of had several conversations and we were talking about what seems to be the topic that we could really bring together, Gallagher and USCA, to our audience. And we landed on really this relationships and coaching culture, right? And what we've seen recently, I think in the last 3 years, really, is we've seen some really big headlines around high profile coaches, perhaps really winning coaches who have a winning culture within their team. And they're being held accountable for the way that they treat their athletes. And what we're also finding is that this is a long, storied past of coaching relationships and coaching culture. And it feels like we're hitting a inflection point. Perhaps it's post Me Too, but we're hitting an inflection point where our athletes, our student athletes, are being vocal about their experiences and wanting to hold those folks accountable. In preparation for this call, I did a little bit more digging. I was looking for some statistical information to kind of quantify what I feel like is a qualifying reaction. But the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which is an organization focused on youth athletics through the U.S. Olympics Commission, they estimate that 80%, I want to get this right, 80% of athletes experience at least one of 18 indicators of psychological harm or neglect. And 22% of athletes have reported they were physically harmed in sport. Oh my goodness. Kind of what's your reaction to this trend? Kind of how are you thinking about it from USCA's perspective?
You know, I think this is one of the reasons why USCA came aboard as a business. I think what happens when you're talking about athletics is it's such a insulary part of any kind of community that there's only a select few number of people that participate or that work in that environment. So they silo themselves off very, very quickly. And
Mhm.
what we found is that, as you mentioned, athletes are being more vocal. What's accepted isn't the same as what was accepted 40 years ago. Your statistics are spot on, and they're worrisome because that's just one area that's been studied. When you look at NCAA athletes and NAIA athletes, all that's very comparable data. So it's important for us as risk managers, or people that care about student athletes or the athlete population, is to make sure we're starting to peel back some of those layers and see what's really happening. What's the environment really like? What's the culture really like? Now, I want to preface it with, there's some really good coaches and cultures and departments that are doing things extremely well, and these tend to be the outliers. However, the outliers are so widely accepted and kind of pacified that it's important for us to do a little deeper dive and take a critical look at those environments.
And I also think it's hard for risk managers. If I wear my kind of prior practitioner hat, I would think it would be really complicated to go in and audit a culture. For your to your point about kind of insular, there's a limited number of people that participate. If you haven't participated in the athletic kind of complex throughout your upbringing, you may not feel comfortable entering that space or really having these difficult conversations. The other thing is too, I mean, as I'm reading these headlines, is these coaches that are being held accountable, they have really good win records, right? For kind of on paper success of your athletic team, by all intents and purposes, they're successful for a winning record. So it's also hard to go in and challenge that and say you're good, but let's talk about how you got there. So, how would you suggest that risk managers can kind of enter this space, start having these, peeling back those layers, as you said, start having these difficult conversations? What are some immediate priorities we can kind of take on to start evaluating risk within our own institutions?
Yeah, I think everything you just said is the whole reason why it never happens, because
Yeah.
there's all these barriers or these perceived barriers. I think one thing to remember is that for many winning coaches and cultures, the assumption is because they're winning and successful, that that's bringing money back into the institution. And for many of those programs, that's not true. So the issue with potentially having a coach that's creating this kind of abusive environment, and then that amount of money that may need to be paid off from a lawsuit, probably doesn't equal any amount of money that they're bringing in. So that's kind of a wash from a money perspective, because these lawsuits and these judgments are extremely high numbers. So you have a due diligence to protect your institution, to go in and investigate and know what's going on. It can't be from a, hey, let's go talk to the coach and ask them what kind of environment they create. And if you're an unfamiliar face and you walk into that department, people are going to want to know who you are and what do you do, and what's your role here. I think it's familiarizing yourself within that department and becoming a regular friendly face that they see on a normal basis, because number one, you're going to start to pick up things, but number two, you're going to see what's reasonable and what's a normal environment for them. I tell people all the time, if you don't know who the head athletic trainer is on your campus, you should find that person and you should have their cell phone, because that is a person that's bound to only protect the student athletes, that a lot of times reports within an athletic department, but really has this duty to protect the student athletes to their best of their ability and needs outside people that they can report to. That athletic trainer can tell you everything about every team, the culture of every team, what practices are being followed, not followed. So it's really important for you to just start to build those relationships. So then, over the course of the next several months, over the course of a year, you can get a better handle on what the environment is. These environments thrive because people aren't asking questions. And so you need to be able to be a person that comes in and starts asking questions.
You know, it's so funny. We just released a Coffee with the Risk Manager episode just before this one, where I'm speaking with Heather Taylor at Grand Valley State
Mm-hmm.
University in Michigan. And Heather, risk manager, she speaks a lot about that risk aware culture and how she develops those relationships. And we didn't even talk about kind of being the familiar face in the room for exposure identification. But this really bridges into that conversation. So nice. So, like, we should have had the three of us on the call together to talk about
Maybe
it.
next time.
Maybe next time. So, here's another barrier I see is we don't know what we're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, resources might be out there for a risk manager who wants to have the conversation, who wants to build that relationship and start peeling back the layers, but doesn't know what they're looking for? Any that come to mind that you're aware of that can really help illustrate what besides watching Ted Lasso, which is phenomenal, what a healthy culture within athletics looks like?
So I would say start really simple. I think the thought process is that if you're dealing on a campus, that the NCAA, the NAIA, the NJCA, any of those groups are really governing health and safety. They really don't. They make recommendations or they make best practice situations, but nobody's getting an NCAA violation because they haven't practiced their emergency action plan. So
Right.
look at what the standards are, and you can talk to your athletic trainer or your medical staff to just start opening the conversation. So I'm giving an example that will kind of fit into this coaching culture. So in the NCAA Inter-Association guidelines, which they developed several years ago, one of their best practices for preventing and preparing for catastrophic injuries was that coaches should no longer use exercise as discipline. And if we talk about these abusive cultures, a lot of times they're heavy on using exercise as punishment.
Mhm.
This document is not a rule, it's a guideline. So a lot of people don't follow it because it's a rule. It's not a rule, it's a guideline. But there's 14 medical organizations that support this document and the use that exercise as punishment should be discontinued. So I'm not a risk manager, but I'm pretty sure that when that goes through the legal process, that may as well be a rule that's applied.
I think
Now,
that's fair.
that's a fair assumption on my part. So if you go into an athletic department and you're noticing at a practice that a coach got frustrated and mad and now they're running, hit the line and they're running back and forth, that's something that's so ingrained in that culture that those coaches aren't even thinking twice about it. And they're doing exercise out of anger or out of frustration. If you go to that athletic trainer, they know they're not supposed to be doing it, have addressed it with the coach, but maybe the athletic department personnel are supporting the coach. Well, we'll accept the risk. So there's all these things that athletic directors and administration might be doing to accept risk that as an outsider, you would look at that and say, clearly you should not be doing exercise as punishment. That makes zero
Yeah.
sense that that's occurring on a campus anywhere. So that's one small little thing that you could do that as you're peeling back the layers, if I get pushback from a coach on that and I say you shouldn't be doing, and they're really fighting me on that, okay,
Mhm.
what else is going on?
Going on.
You know,
Yeah.
that's going to get you kind of to the point that you're starting to do and you're investigating more. Meeting with your student athlete and your student athlete groups, if they're familiar with you as a face, the athletic departments that are doing it really well welcome people to investigate what they're doing. They love to talk about all the great resources they have. It's the ones that are super closed off that you need to be really scared about. And they're the ones that typically people shy back away because they're worried about, interfering or having the wrong conversation or making people upset.
Wow.
But that's just a really good example, and we'll send after this video. We'll make sure that we've linked together either the document or how you can access the document. But that's one really good example of something that's in writing that's completely being ignored. That it's just so
Wild. Yeah.
socialized that nobody thinks twice about it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And again, I mentioned this. I'm not a student athlete. I never was. I'm not an athlete. I wasn't a student athlete ever. I've never participated in athletics. So really, in preparation for talking with you and kind of having this conversation, I had to do my own research to understand what coaching culture should look like versus what maybe, again, athletes who have been through this complex, who have kind of had these experiences and their understandings and perceptions about what successful coaching looks like. And what I tripped upon was, and I was really impressed actually, is the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, again, U.S. Olympics Commission, so youth sports, but kind of similar organization. Similar mission organization. They published a toolkit for healthy coach relationships. And when I was going through it, and it defines things like boundaries, they give a lot of scenario based things. If just what you were explaining, if you walk in and you see a coach running lines and you push back and they start to circle around the wagons on that one, you kind of have a red flag. They have a lot of those examples. And for me, kind of wearing my risk manager hat, as I was looking at that, I go, this would be really awesome to orient myself before I walked into my athletic director meeting. So, to your point, I think it's probably a good idea to compile some of these and send some of these out as we think about barriers of what's getting in the way of us really being able to critically look at that. So I love the offer to send it out. And actually, I'm going to partner it with that Safe Sport resource as well.
And one of the things I think is really, it can be intimidating for some people, because I think you're thinking in your mind that I need to understand athletics in order to, do an evaluation or assessment. But I don't think you need to understand athletics as much as you think you do. I think the problem is that athletics has what they consider to be the norm. We need people that are not a part of that culture to come in and socialize what should be the norm. So I'll give a great example. I went to my niece's travel soccer game a couple months ago, and I worked in Division I Power 5 athletics with the best of the best people for long periods of time. And I'm watching these young athletes, and I'm watching a coach on another team completely berate the players and really upset about it. And I looked at one of the parents who I knew from that opposing team and said, "Why are you letting a coach talk to your child that way?" And it was, well, I mean, it's making them tough, and I want her to get a scholarship, and this is the process that you go through. And you could just see the child kind of like breaking down a little bit, looking to their parents for reassurance of what they're doing. And I'm like, you're just paying this coach thousands of dollars a year to talk to your child that way. What if that was the math teacher? Would you be okay with your math teacher talking to your student that way? And so, because we've just accepted it as that's part of what athletics is and it's supposed to build character in some way, we've lost complete sight of, what it really means to educate and teach young adults and young students and young teenagers. So my point being is that sometimes coming in with a fresh set of eyes
is a good
really,
thing.
really crucial. Yeah, it's really important.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on to talk with us and being kind of an invited guest into this series. I've learned so much in working with Yuska over the last couple of months. You're a wealth of information, so I really appreciate you sharing that knowledge with us and allowing us to kind of disseminate that through our audience. So thank you, Angie, and have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Cheers.